Welcome to the Restless Politics. Coming up tonight is, the basic thing is this. It appears that they knew when the date of election would be. They rushed to the betting office before anyone else knew and put a bet down saying the date of the election is going to be this.
If you want to in government and you are corrupt, you could make an absolute fortune.
It shows actually how you can almost lose a campaign in a single sentence. If our polls are right, and my sense is a lot of the public reflect this in the way they talk, Farage has really blown his chances.
We only have one vote in this election. And I read an interview where you suggested you might vote for the Green Party. So I just want to ask you, you are happy voting for a party that says it will immediately restore pay for junior doctors and give them a 35% increase. Is that affordable?
These are good questions, Alastair. I know where this is going. You're going to do this to me with every bit of their manifesto.
So that's a no. Just a bit.
Why don't you just tell us about their manifesto?
Welcome to Restless Politics with me, Alastair Campbell.
And me, Rory Stewart. And a reminder that on election night, you and I are going to be up through the night with viewers, with Krishna Gurumurthy,
Hopefully with viewers, yeah.
with Emily Maitlis, and with an amazing cast of very, very senior politicians, people from Gogglebox. It's going to be probably the most exciting election coverage that anyone's ever seen.
For the best analysis, you go to Channel 4. Have you seen the trailer?
Oh, it's amazing. It's looking good.
Well, no, I mean, it took a lot of bloody work, didn't it?
It did take a lot of work. Yeah.
What did you? I refused to do that thing.
I had a little light bulb thing.
The light bulb. I refused. I said, I'm not doing the light bulb thing. But I think the opinions thing, should we let them in a little secret as well?
Yeah, go on. Explain it.
Well, we did it separately.
We did it separately, but they made it look like it was together.
They made it look like we were in the same room at the
And we're
same
going to be
time.
joined on the night by Channel 4's amazing news editor, Gary Gibbon. One of the most,
editor.
yep,
Let's give him
amazing,
his real job.
serious political
He
analyst.
is, yeah. He's one of the best, without a doubt.
Yeah.
No, it'd be good. So, what should we talk about? General election in the UK.
We're going to be talking about the betting scandal, polling. Let's try to get into some of the other parties. We hear a lot about Conservative and Labour.
Okay.
So, I'd like to hear a little bit about Plaid, hear a little bit about the SNP.
Or your party, I read.
Yeah,
the Green Party.
The Greens,
You're
that's right.
flirting.
Yeah, flirting with the
Rory,
Greens.
do you know what the Greens are putting forward? You talk about Liz Truss and unfunded promises.
You should see the Greens.
Yeah.
No, actually,
We
no.
have-
To
we need
be
a
fair,
word.
they're funded. I mean, they're just massive tax rises to underwrite them.
They haven't really said how many taxes they're going to raise.
At
to
least
pay
they're
for
not
this.
saying they're not raising taxes.
Okay,
They're
okay.
absolutely leaning into the taxes.
Right. We're also going to talk about the French election. I've been in Germany and France this week, and the French election, I have to say, your initial instinct was right. This is meltdown time. So listen, let's start with betting.
The basic thing is this. It appears that they knew when the date of election would be. As soon as they found out when Rishi Sunak was going to do the election, they rushed to the betting office before anyone else knew and put a bet down saying the date of the election is going to be this.
If I think back to the number of papers that came across my desk in Downing Street, where Craig Williamson would have been, that said secret, market sensitive, or your eyes only, commercial consequences, etc. That stuff happens all the time. So if you want to in government and you are corrupt, you could make an absolute fortune.
There's a very famous case of this. The Liberal Party, before the First World War, the Marconi scandal, made literally millions off betting, buying shares on a company they knew the government was going to buy 2 days later. But in this case, I'd like to get into this a bit because it's something that probably in 5-10 years' time, almost nobody will remember. It's something that is very revealing. It would be nice to work out what it is exactly that is making people so angry. It's not the sums of money, is it? No. Part of it is what you're getting at, which is just that the tone of the whole thing, that presumably when you're working in Downing Street or when I'm working with Theresa May, we're incredibly proud of our jobs, of working with the Prime Minister. We feel that we're in on secrets and we feel that it's a very special thing to try to protect.
You should feel that you're part of public service. So the last thing that should be at the forefront of your mind is how do I make a few bob out of this?
There's also a sense of real kind of shabby pettiness to it, isn't there? That instead of coming home and, maybe saying very confidentially to your partner, oh my goodness, this is amazing. There might be an election happening, and feeling really lucky to be part of the inner workings of government, part of a team, loving your Prime Minister, supporting him.
Up for the fight.
What you're somehow doing is coming home and saying, do you think we could nip down and
make a few quid?
Put 150 quid on it?
I know.
And in the polls, so we have a JL Partners Restless Politics poll that we're conducting every week. And interestingly, this is making people very, very angry. It's one of the number one issues that people are aware of this week in the election. But it doesn't seem to be shifting many of the existing Conservative votes. And I guess possibly one of the reasons for that is that if I was going to be critical about the Conservatives, people who are sticking with them at the moment, having gone through Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and all this sort of complete shameful chaos and mess, are hardly going to be put off by this.
I think there's something else going on, because the most interesting thing in the poll to me, apart from the fact that Keir Starmer has overtaken Rishi Sunak as the person you'd most trust to get out of an escape room, that made me laugh. But the thing that I thought the most interesting thing was that Nigel Farage is starting to drop. So the big drop this week is actually Reform and Nigel Farage, particularly with women. Those women who voted Tory in 2019, who have been flirting with Reform, now seem to be going either to don't know, won't vote, or back to the Tories.
My mother is an example of this, I'm afraid. So she's a 2019 Conservative voter, and she had been saying to me, I don't want to drop her in it, but she'd been saying to me sort of a week or two ago, wow, Nigel Farage, he says some common sense, and I don't think anyone thinks we're going to be able to meet these net zero targets.
Did she go to one of these posh schools as well?
No, she didn't. No, she went to a London day school. Be pleased to hear. So she then said to me yesterday, well, Farage has completely blown it. I mean, nobody's ever going to vote for him.
Because of Russia.
Because of Russia-Ukraine. And of course, so for her, and this will be true for quite a lot, I think, of Conservative voters who are flirting with Reform, they're deeply, deeply sympathetic towards Ukraine. They are thoroughly shocked by the fact that Nigel Farage has apparently come out with a pretty pro-Putin line, essentially saying, Ukraine's lost, we're going to have to make a deal.
Well, also that we provoked it. I mean, it is the Putin talking points. These are written by Dmitry Peskov, these talking points. And also, I think the two other interesting things. One is the Reform candidates, right? The guy in Salisbury, and the listeners will remember Salisbury, where the two agents came over to look at the lovely spire and accidentally, while they were there, killed a member of the British public.
With Novichok.
Yeah. The candidate in Salisbury has talked about, Putin being quite a good thing. Now, and Farage, unlike Richard Tice, when he was leader of this rabble, Richard Tice used to call out some of these candidates when they stepped over the mark. Farage seems to think all this stuff is fine.
So I think it's also worth understanding why. So people are moving away from Farage, I think, and also interesting the way in which this is. Basically, it was an interview, wasn't it? It was with Nick Robinson that blew the whole thing.
To be fair to Nick Robinson, it was a very good interview on that, on Brexit, on all sorts of other issues.
And it shows actually how you can almost lose a campaign in a single sentence. I mean, if our polls are right, and my sense is a lot of the public reflect this in the way they talk, Farage has really blown his chances.
I still think a bit like Trump, a bit like Le Pen, a bit like the AfD. There are people who, it doesn't matter what he says, they have decided he's the incumbent, he's the challenger, he's the kind of guy who's blowing things up, and they want that. But I think for people who are really starting to think about this, what's happened is, because he is the ultimate populist, he very rarely gets challenged. Apart from Nick Robinson, to be fair to him, and Susanna Reid a bit on GMB, yet to really seen him pushed on a difficult policy question. When he is, which is, by the way, why he's avoiding us, when he is pushed, he doesn't stand up to much scrutiny because he's full of BS. It's full of little sound bites, easy solutions, just like the populists everywhere. And I think once people get that, some of them will move away from him.
It's also interesting getting into his head because clearly he's become very, very complacent. He wasn't, he was just saying the first thing that came to his head. He obviously didn't think through properly what he was saying. He's got himself into a lazy position of being the sort of guy that challenges conventional wisdom, speaks uncomfortable truths. So presumably, he's out with his friends from the Reform Party saying to them, yeah, well, this stuff was all provoked by Europe. And he's now campaigning with a poster behind him with a picture of Boris Johnson.
I mean, also the other thing, this. In fact, you've complained about it because I think you cope with it less well than I do. When you're walking around and about during a kind of heightened period like this, you get loads of people stopping in the street, saying nice things to you, shouting things out of car windows. In general, in our country, the people who don't like you stay stum. Every now and again, you might get one. I still get the occasional war criminal shout and stuff like that. So Farage is going around the place in his own little bubble, put together by his own little team and thinks that this great revolt is going to sweep him into power in 5 years. And I think he's just getting hubris, the same hubris that drove Macron, which we'll talk about later, to call his election, the same hubris that told Sunak, if I have 6 weeks, I can turn this around. I think Farage is showing the same hubris.
And interestingly, he actually, I was talking to him about this when I interviewed him on a radio show, and he was explaining that he basically doesn't meet the public anymore. He now travels around with security and locks out cars.
That's all part of the image. That's all part of the shtick.
But part of the problem there is that he's just not getting a sense of what ordinary voters. You can really get into a really weird world if you spend your whole time.
But I think on the polling, when he first came out, first of all, he said he wasn't going to run. And then he changed his mind. And that was a big moment in the campaign. And for 2 or 3 days, he had the platform there to say what he wanted. As the scrutiny has begun, he's really started to fall. Can I ask you a media management advice question, Rory?
Go on.
This morning, I was on Good Morning Britain.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Andrew Pearce of the Daily Mail.
Not your greatest friend, no.
In fact, I think he called me a war criminal on the programme. But anyway, however, he presents a GBNews programme. And he said to me, why you keep going on about how Farage won't come on your podcast. Why don't you come on GBNews tomorrow and talk about Farage and your books? Now, I'm quite tempted.
You should do it. Why not?
Do you think so?
Yeah, why not? I did Novara Media.
I've not done GBNews.
I did Novara Media.
Yeah, but you're a Green Party supporter. I mean, you're class A, the Corbynistas. They're always going to have you, Rory.
No, you should do it.
Do you think so?
You should do it. Yeah, you should do it. You should do it. You should do it. You'll keep your integrity. Be yourself.
Yeah.
Do it. Why not?
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay.
Now, just to finish before we move into our break.
Is there anything else about the poll you want to say?
Well, I think that one thing that I thought was striking is that one of the disputes around Labour, at least in bits the media, is that J.K. Rowling, the great author of the Harry Potter books, has come out and said that she can't find herself voting for Labour because she's very uncomfortable with their position on transgender. And this was big news, front page of the Times. She will think, and the people who agree with her, that this can be a big, big problem for Labour. And indeed, you can see Labour responding very cautiously to her. But in the polling, it doesn't seem to have any impact at all. It seems to be, and actually, my sense is, having talked to our polling team, they suspect the public has barely even noticed.
Interesting. We've been tracking for the electorate as a whole, but also different groups, Reform voters, Tory voters, Labour, Lib Dem, etc., the issues. And Reform is the only one where immigrants stop the votes remains, although I think their new strategy is stop the votes to try and stop people voting. But their new strategy, so that's up there for them. It's much lower down for every other cohort. But what we've sort of wrapped up as wokery,
which is the sort of cultural war issues which in the US is central to elections. The US is all about abortion, gun rights, transgender.
But for all of these groups, including Reform and including 2019 Tories, it's way, 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 way down.
So this is a conventional, in some ways, election in Britain being fought on the economy, on the NHS,
service, public services, etc.
But it's not really a cultural war.
No, and I'll tell you. Well, is it and isn't it? I mean, I think it depends. I think for those who are fighting it, it really is. I was struck, for example, I think you got the same. The minute that story appeared, I was being sort of, I hate the way people do this. Why have you not commented on J.K. Rowling's article in the Times?
Sure.
And I correctly and accurately answered, one, because I haven't read it.
Sure.
Why I haven't read it? Because I'm on a train to the football, which today I'm taking more seriously than this election.
Sure.
Okay. After which you get an avalanche of it.
Sure.
Now,
and I got a lot of this too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
what's your answer now you've thought about it a bit?
Well, my answer is I think that I feel that the trans community, which is a very, very, very small proportion of the population, are treated appallingly, suffer as much, if not more, discrimination than any other group. And I hate the way that the debate is toxified. And I think the Tories have done it, and I've got a lot of respect for J.K. Rowling. But to come out and say that because people don't agree with her position on it, Labour are turning their back on women, I'm sorry, you don't speak for all women, and you certainly don't speak for the women in my life.
So my view on this, when people say, why are you, Rory and Alastair, not coming out on this? Does it not matter to you because you're men? Is that in some ways, I'm almost tempted to say that as men, we're not very well equipped to comment on this, and that actually we don't understand these issues very deeply. I feel in my own life very divided.
But as a policymaker, you have to have a position.
You absolutely do, yeah. But just to sort of talk through where I am, so I've got very strong transgender friends, including a doctor who's involved in some of the therapy and practices to help people transition. I'm also very, very aware of strong feminist friends who are deeply appalled by the idea of intrusions on their privacy, what they perceive as threats to their security, and sometimes correctly.
Mm-hmm. I get that. I totally get that.
And given that, I'm not sure that you and I weighing in on this is awfully helpful. I mean, I think it's an issue where actually in some ways we need to show a bit of humility and hold back. And I think it's a bit odd that the immediate response from people is, well, why are Rory and Alastair not talking about it? Yeah.
No, I find, David Cameron's sister-in-law, Emily Sheffield, just endlessly, why are you not talking about it? Surely you've had time to read it now. Well, the truth is, no, I didn't read it in the end because I know what J.K. Rowling thinks. And I just feel that this issue, amongst many others, has been over-weaponized. And the people who most feel it are the people who are already in a terrible position, some of them.
Just to finish, for people who are interested in hearing J.K. Rowling's views in more detail, there's a very sympathetic, very interesting podcast called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling that I've been listening to, where she is interviewed for many, many hours talking through her thoughts on this. And I think it's a great way of getting your head around it if you want to get into it more deeply. So, Alastair, as we come back from the break, we're going to get into AI and deepfakes, and in particular, the possibility that you yourself may have been generating deepfakes. Welcome back to The Rest is Politics with me, Rory Stewart.
And me, Alastair Campbell. And Rory, you seem to have a new look.
It's like
swinging your arm over your chair.
It's a macho look. It's something I took it from Vladimir Putin. I was looking at him at the end of that big marble table. It's, because we're not standing up, I can't do that Tory power pose thing where they keep their legs like 3 feet ahead. Yeah.
Now, you want to talk about deepfakes. Why do you want to talk about deepfakes?
Yeah, I want to talk about deepfakes. Well, first the serious, and then I'm going to tease you a little bit about your part in this. But the serious thing is that obviously this is the year of elections, but it's also the year of AI. So this is the year where ChatGPT-4 has shown this incredible potential with large language models. And it's the first year that we've had the real potential to generate astonishing deep fakes. So my Twitter is full of pictures and ads saying, a beautiful blonde girl standing by beach. That's probably because I'm looking at the wrong things on Twitter. But anyway, generated by AI.
Is that how it works?
What you mean?
Because I get those as well.
Maybe we're just men. Maybe we're okay.
Okay.
Let's hope everybody who's listening gets those things on their Twitter feed so that we don't get mocked too much. Anyway, the AI-generated potential is huge, and there's a real risk going forward that it could completely destabilize elections. In 2016, Trump's use of particularly Facebook, but also to some extent Twitter, really gave him the edge in this election. So we and many others were very, very worried that this was going to be the year where AI would blow the whole thing up. In fact, actually, so far, touching wood, there haven't been big cases, and it's worth registering this in this election, where deep fakes really seem to be breaking through and changing the shape of these elections. Instead, most of it is pretty ordinary. Self-inflicted damage by the Tories on betting campaigns and all the other dozen self-inflicted bits of damage.
I keep seeing this stuff about Minecraft. Now, I don't even know what Minecraft is, but it's like Nigel Farage. It's a
great game. We should play Minecraft together.
Nigel Farage blowing up Rishi Sunak, and Rishi Sunak blowing up Keir Starmer, and Keir Starmer blowing up somebody else. What is going on there?
So there's that video, and then there's a video out there of Rishi Sunak explaining to 11-year-olds that they're going to be going through this crazy terrain and there are going to be snipers. This is all connected to his vision of national service. Now, the reason, though, that we're coming to this is that actually a lot of this is really satire. It's not actually designed for most people to fool them. And the reason why I'm raising that is that you have been slightly at the centre of this. So you put out what you intended as a joke. Tell us a little bit about what you put out on Twitter.
So I decided to have let's agree that this is the worst campaign we've ever seen. I mean, it beats Theresa May and the death tax. The Tory campaign has been terrible. So I started this theme on social media saying that I was being leaked all the morning notes from the campaign director. Yeah. So this is to give you yesterday's. We're fielding Chris Heaton-Harris on the media this morning. You'll know he's not standing as a candidate, but as with Michael Gove, we think this helps. Please don't leak, but the Chancellor called the Prime Minister yesterday furious at his Brexit is great 8th anniversary tweet. Overnight focus groups suggest Hunt has a point, but let's double down to show confidence. Okay, now, this is the bit where you should realise it's satire. Tomorrow, Sir Gavin Williamson is to be our main message carrier. Unfortunately, most of current Cabinet now feel either in lost cause seats or marginals have to respect their refusal to campaign. As you know, Gav is a great salesman. We're hoping he can do for Rishi what he once did for fireplaces.
Okay, so it's great. It's satire. And
it's obvious, yeah?
And, well, for satire to work, it needs to be just on the edge of being plausible. So it's not completely preposterous. You're writing it in the style in which those things are. And the result is that when I first saw it, I thought, wait a second, has he got a leak thing? Then I read to the bottom and I thought, no, this is just Alastair putting out somewhere between satire and fake news.
Well, if I tell you some of the names, I told him I wouldn't drop him in it, but I think he's big enough to take it. Lionel Barber, ex-editor of the Financial Times, man with a brain the size of a planet, phoned me as I was coming back from Germany yesterday and said, these notes you're getting, before I retweet them, are they real?
So Alastair, and not to put it in, but in a sense, this is one of the interesting things that actually, as we move forward into the world of questions around AI and deep fakes, most of these things are forms of satire. But the problem is that we don't have a culture with a settled enough understanding of a lot of these things for people to be sure it's satire. So if I were to put out a tweet saying, leaked Tory document, we're going to cut all benefit for older people and work out how, and they'll just die 6 months earlier and we don't really care. I'm pretty sure that there would be hundreds of thousands of people in the country who'd be like, oh yeah, typical Tories, let's retweet that.
And then the Tories would come out and deny it. And people would say, oh, well, no smoke without fire, something's going on here. And Rory Stewart knows what's going on and blah, blah, blah. But so interestingly, there's a couple of things which I think are maybe more serious. So Keir Starmer, as you know, quite often attacked from the left of the Labour Party. And they were spreading some, and again, when I say they, it comes from somewhere and then it gets spread. And this was Wes Streeting saying something about Diane Abbott that it turned out his words were being doctored. And another one where a teacher in Dudley was delivering leaflets for Labour, and the footage from a doorbell video was taken and doctored, and then it was distributed so that it looked like this person was racially abusing somebody. So you do have to watch out for this stuff.
There was an attempt by The Sun to try to, I guess, learn from the format of people like us by doing like a live YouTube interview with Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, and it was probably quite a coup for them. Mm-hmm. It was slightly chaotic. Some of the text seemed to go wrong. People were then trying to type in Sun YouTube and getting images of Solus, the kind of the planet.
The sun, the big one.
The sun. But ultimately there were 7,000 viewers for Rishi Sunak, and just over that, maybe 8,000 viewers for Keir Starmer. Now, to put that in context, when we have a successful live YouTube, we're getting like 27,000 people. So nearly four times as many people live, and then we'll get many, many more, into the hundreds of thousands.
Do you think that's because we're more popular than The Sun, or we're more popular than Rishi Sunak?
I think before our heads get too big, I think the real thing is people have completely lost interest in this format of leaders' debates. And I wonder what that means for the future. Because I would have thought in 5 years' time, some of these parties trying to avoid the debates might just be like, listen,
pointless.
The reason I'm not doing it is only 7,000 people are watching. So why would I take the risk?
Yeah, that being said, though, I didn't watch it, but I did follow it, and I followed the coverage of it, which was huge. And actually, there was a whole infrastructure around it, like all the other debates. There was a spin room. There were politicians from the cabinet and the shadow cabinet. Your friend Gillian Keegan did not cover Self and Glory, I have to say. Come back to that maybe. But I think that's why they will think they're worth doing. I actually think of the formats, the best debates have been the ones where the leaders have not necessarily gone head to head. Apart from, I thought the best moderating was by Mishal Hussain in the one where the 7 some of mix of non-leaders and
she
leaders.
Was very good, wasn't she?
But I also think I did think Nick Robinson's interview with Farage was very, very good. But I think for the next head-to-head between Sunak and Keir Starmer, I really, really, really hope that both of them do not go back into that you said, scrap, because the people are turning right off that.
So let's come to 5 years' time again. I would say that if you were the campaign director, you would probably say, listen, there's very little upside, only 7,000 people watch, and the Nick Robinson-Farage example shows there is considerable downside.
Risk. Yeah.
If you say anything wrong at all. That's where you get the coverage.
Well, I think if I was the Tory campaign director, I'd be down at William Hill saying, can I have £1,000 at 100 to 1? There won't be any TV debates next time. Now, listen, Rory, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the manifestos of the smaller parties, including the Green Party, because I want to know whether you're really going to put your cross in a ballot box that's putting forward some of their policies. Back in a minute. Welcome back to Rest Politics and me, Alastair Campbell.
And me, Rory Stewart.
Now, Rory, we only have one vote in this election for one candidate. We can't vote for an outcome.
No?
We can't vote for 28% this, 33% that. We can't do that.
You just got to vote for one person.
No.
Yeah.
And I read an interview where you suggested you might vote for the Green Party. So I just want to ask you, these are all yes or no questions. Yeah. You are happy voting for a party that says it will immediately restore pay for junior doctors and give them a 35% increase. Is that affordable?
Yeah, these are good questions, Alastair. I know where this is going. You're going to do this to me with every bit of their manifesto.
So that's a no. Just a minute.
Why don't you just tell us about their manifesto rather than dragging me into the yes and no?
Well, let's just, as we go through it. So they're going to raise tax by £151 billion a year.
Yep.
Okay. New tax on the wealthy, that includes you, obviously. 1% a year on the assets of people with more than 10 million, 2% on those with more than 1 billion. I actually quite like that. 8% national insurance rate on income in the upper earnings limit. They're going to get to net zero by 2040. Bit vague how. They're going to remove VAT from all cultural activities. Again, I would love to see that. They're going to move forward with the second stage of Leveson inquiry. I would vote for that. They're going to tighten the law so that no individual or company owns more than 20% of a media market. Yeah, I can see why that's popular. They're going to get rid of Trident, Rory.
Yeah.
Well, yes or no, Trident?
Well, we'll come into that, but let me just step back for a second. So,
another 20 billion for social care. Frequent flyer levies, Rory.
Frequent flyer levies.
That's going to hit you hard. Short haul flight bans. Short haul flight bans up to Scotland. What do you think?
I was talking to the Labour candidate in my constituency. He was commenting that I represent quite a large group of people that he's been speaking to who are happy to pay more tax, wealthier people who are happy to pay more tax. The reason why this is important is that if Labour wins a very large majority, a lot of the challenge to Labour may not come in the future from the right, may come from the left. And so Green, SNP, Plaid, Lib Dem manifestos, these smaller parties, represent the more left-wing position now in British politics. And that position, as you say, almost all their manifestos are the same. So SNP is also in favour of abolishing Trident. Plaid is in favour of abolishing Trident. All of them want to put more money into the NHS. All of them are signalling that they're going to spend billions of pounds more. All of them are going to almost all of them are trying to get rid of the two-child limit on child benefit. Almost all of them are trying to provide free adult social care. So I think if you look at the manifestos together, SNP, Plaid, Greens, you can sort of see now a loss of the issues that matter to millions of voters. All of them are trying to bring the net zero target forward. The question for me, I guess, is if Labour wins a big majority, which is an if, as you say.
It's a big if because of this.
Do these parties then represent the thing that's going to be a challenge to Labour? And will a new Labour government be looking at this thinking, we have a problem here? Oh, the other thing is they're all in favour of immediate ceasefire in Gaza. These are manifestos which, when I read them, are directed more against the Labour Party than they are against the Conservatives.
But if you so when Farage did his contract with the people, let's not call it a manifesto, he said that when he was sort of picked apart on the sort of unfunded promises and all this, he said, well, these aren't things we're going to do. This is what we think. This is what we believe. I think once you get into manifestos, and it's okay for parties to say, as they all do, fully funded, fully costed. But you've been around long enough. You know that stuff I read out from the Green Manifesto doesn't stand up to scrutiny in terms of being deliverable on the time frame they're talking about.
Well, they could raise £151 billion more tax, but it would have the most intense impact on the British economy, because the only way they could get it is not through these wealth taxes.
No.
They'd only generate that money by hitting income tax would have to go up, and not just income tax on the wealthy. To get that
Across
kind
the
of
board.
hundreds of billions of pounds, you have to get income tax across the board. I also think that it's interesting that the Lib Dems, who often get a lot of credit because they get lovely pictures themselves on water parks, are talking about £27 billion a year more spending. And again, when you ask them where their money's coming from, they say we're going to crack down on tax avoidance. We're going to tax avoidance.
But I'll tell you why I worry about this whole thing. Just on the way here, I had a coffee in a place around the corner, and a guy came and sat next to me. We were chatting away, and he said that he'd been talking to one of his kids, who said, and they're a Labour family, but he said, "No, I think I can vote Green. I vote Green. I like, well, because it's the climate, etc. And Labour are going to win anyway." And this is what I really worry about. I think the Tory strategy at the moment is, I say, it's not stop.
It's a great strategy. It's a great.
Well, no, but I'll tell you
people
what.
are going to write books about the strategy.
They might do, but I'll tell you what they're trying to do. Their
what are
message.
they trying to do exactly?
Well, as I said in one of my campaign notes that I spoofed, essentially they're saying, we're shit and we know we are, right? The government has had a terrible record. Our leaders have been hopeless. We've got no real plans for the future. The only way we might sneak in is by saying we've lost, but don't give Labour a supermajority. Right. Supermajority does not exist in our constitution. A supermajority is what we should have had for Brexit, where you say, because this change is so big, it's got to be a supermajority, 2/3 or whatever.
I agree, it's ridiculous. But why would that strategy work? Why would it not just make people vote for the Greens and not for the Conservatives?
That's the point. Yeah. It will make them vote. It might make them vote for the Greens. It will make.
And how would that help the Conservatives? Not really.
No, it might, because it stops Labour winning so big, and also it splits votes everywhere.
Perhaps the biggest illustration, because we're talking about small parties, is Scotland.
Yeah.
So you had one poll showing the SNP would get 34 seats and Labour would get 17, and then a day later, 3 more polls showing exactly the reverse, 34-15 in the other direction. And the fact that it's that tight, and this is all about whether, Labour's going to get 36%, the SNP 32%, or SNP 36% and Labour 34%.
These are you're talking small numbers, particularly in these smaller constituencies.
Could mean that they get double the number of votes. And now, spoiler alert, the Conservatives and the Lib Dems end up doing very badly in all these polls. But it's a huge difference in Scotland.
Yeah, but there are
they're all between sort of 4 and 2 seats. Yeah.
Yeah, but there are places where the goal of the Conservatives will be stop people voting other parties who would thereby see the Tories fall. So they want to split those votes, and that includes getting people who say, "Sod it, I'm not going to vote."
So let's look again at the SNP thing. So they're looking at that. Few thousand votes could make a huge difference. They could get double the number of Labour seats if they get it right. How do they do it? So SNP manifesto is against the Westminster consensus on cuts. So that's reminding people that Labour's basically signed up to £18 billion worth of spending cuts and not telling us where they're coming from. Rejoin the EU, right? Very popular with voters like you. You famously voted Lib Dem because you were so angry with Labour's position.
In the European elections.
Yeah, so angry with Labour's position on the EU. Yep.
Got expelled.
Put much more money into the NHS, again, which Labour has not committed to put this. So they're talking about £16 billion annually.
This is harder for them, though, because they are in government when it comes to health.
Ceasefire in Gaza.
Yeah.
No arms sales to Israel. Again, that will appeal to people who are unhappy with Labour's position. Scrap the 2-child benefit cap and scrap Trident, which appeals less to you.
I've got to say...
You've always been a big pro-Trident guy, haven't you? You like Trident. You like nukes.
Rory, I cannot believe that you're
going
to
vote... It's Doctor Strangelove. You on
I cannot believe that you're going to vote Green with the defence policy. I've just come back from Germany, as you know, and I saw John Swinney in Munich at the Scotland-Germany game.
In his kilt?
In his kilt, and he said he'd done a lot of canvassing. And at this game, the last game, I bumped into our old friend Victor Orban. I think he's going to be a no for the podcast, by the way. I also Angus Robertson, SNP, and I met a lot of Scottish voters. Mm-hmm. And what I would report back from my very extensive, in many cases slightly inebriated, large focus group to whom I entertained with my bagpipes, I sense that the time for a change thing is happening in Scotland, even with people who remain committed to independence. I met one guy, very intelligent guy, and he said, "Look, I'm telling you, I'm absolutely 100% for independence. I think the sooner we get out of the UK, the better. But for this election, I just want to be part of seeing the Tories out, and I'm gonna work it out."
So
I think there's a lot of that going on.
The polls suggest this. So the polls suggest still almost half the population of Scotland is in favour of independence. But of those, only 64% may be about a vote for the SNP.
Yeah.
And that's partly about getting Tories out. It's partly that the SNP just hasn't been performing. And remember, Humza Yousaf resigned only 2 weeks before the election. So John Swinney's had a tiny amount of time to turn the party around. And we've had all this chaos around Nicola Sturgeon and her husband.
Yeah, I think John Swinney has stabilised things a bit. But it was interesting. I got a lot of people who were basically saying, just got to work out how we get rid of the Tories.
Right. Well, as we come back from the break, we'll now go into probably the most dramatic electoral news of all, which is France, which could change the whole face of Europe.
Yep.
Welcome back to The Rest is Politics on Channel 4 with me, Rory Stewart.
And me, Alastair Campbell, about to talk about La France.
Where you've just been for the last few days. I mean, you are our French correspondent, and you've turned up with a French newspaper. Go on, give us a sense of what you've been reading in the French newspaper.
Well, I've got a lot
perhaps
of French.
Translate for those of us who are not quite as fluent in French.
Well, I found it in Libération. I found this interview with Jacques Attali. Remember Jacques Attali?
Yes, yeah.
Who is a friend of mine, very, very close advisor to François Mitterrand when he was president, who lived through that cohabitation with Chirac, when you have the president of one party and the prime minister of another.
And just sorry, for listeners, this is very relevant because in France, there's two totally different elections. There's the election for the president and then the election for the National Assembly or Parliament. And it can, as it did with Chirac and Jospin, go wrong. So you can end up with a president of one party and a parliament dominated by another party. So prime minister of one party, president for another. And then you have really interesting challenges in terms of governing France.
And Attali says what Macron has done is a disaster. It's a farce. He says that he is putting at risk the future of the Republic.
And just again to remind people, what Macron has done is, without having to, he's triggered an early election. And we'll
on
get
the back of the Europeans going so badly.
Yeah. But he didn't need to do it. And what he's done is, I got actually a message from a French friend of mine who said, this is absolutely typical. It's disgusting. Initially, I sympathized with him, but now, he said, I agree with you, Rory. Macron's going around saying, you're going to vote for me whether you like it or not. I'm the only adult in the room, and this really irritates voters.
Well, I think I told you before that when he first got elected, I went and did a talk with all the new MPs, so I got to know some of them quite well. I'll just tell you some of the things they're saying. One said he's not just dissolved Parliament, he's dissolved himself. He's smashed his own brand, gone into a ditch, and he's taking us with him. Another one who said, Macron is not my leader anymore, Edouard Philippe is.
These are all people getting in touch with you privately, yeah.
Oh, the people I was talking to, yeah. And the other thing, there's a word that has now entered the language, which is démacronisation, demacronization. You've had Attal, the Prime Minister, Bruno, the Economics Minister, Darmanin, the Interior Minister, all just making it clear this wasn't my idea. Now, all that being said, the only party that has shifted upwards in the polls since it started is Macron. But the numbers are, Le Pen's party are way, way ahead. And what Jacques Attali is saying is that, part of Macron's strategy is to say, if the National Front, the Rassemblement National, do get in, and Bardella, this young 28-year-old guy, does become the prime minister, then people can see that when they do have power, they balls it up. And Attali makes the point, there was a lot of that in 1933 in Germany.
Exactly. Yeah.
And just be careful what you play with.
Exactly. Be very, very careful there, because if they don't balls it up and they do well, then you end up with, or appear to do well, then you're in a real difficult situation. So to bring us back to the polls, Marine Le Pen's party, which is the old far-right party, the old National Front party, seems to be on 36%. This left-wing alliance, this Popular Front, seems to be on 27%, and Macron seems to be on 20%. And there's many, many things to talk about here, but one of them is, again, people getting in touch with me. I don't know whether you found this in Paris, but that you're now beginning to see senior civil servants, senior professionals who in the past would never have admitted voting for the National Front, now prepared to say openly that they would support Le Pen's party. And in the presidential election, the majority by a small margin of the police and the military appear to have voted for Le Pen. So she's becoming more acceptable. And this is very strange because this is a party whose roots included, a treasurer who'd been part of the Waffen-SS Charlemagne division. Her father was somebody who said, the Holocaust was a minor detail, who said the Nazi occupation of France hadn't been that bad. And a lot of this is also about a trend in French politics, which a man called Julian Jackson's written a beautiful book about called The Trial of Marshal Pétain, that they're people who support Vichy. They support the legacy of Pétain, who was the Second World War ruler.
I think the Financial Times yesterday led on a survey showing that the Le Pen's party was now ahead on the economy. Now, you talk about the Green Party and Farage's party with unfunded promises. I mean, Le Pen's lot are off the scale with it. So what people are saying is, even at the risk of smashing the economy, and as I said to you last week, Liz Truss figures large in this debate because they're basically saying, let's not risk a rerun of Truss. So I think we're at that place where he hasn't got much time. I mean, the first round is this weekend. And the other thing where he's really, really, really taking a hit politically is the fact that this is happening on the eve of the Olympic Games, which was meant to be about bringing the country together. I mean, that's really people are really angry about that.
Another dynamic is people's suspicion in France of this left-wing coalition. So you've talked a bit about Jean-Luc Mélenchon and what he represents, but this is a coalition that is doing things such as saying we're going to reduce the retirement age back down to 60. They're talking about big wealth taxes. They're talking about freezing prices, price controls. So the question for some voters, including businesses, is who's the best to take on the left? And that, unfortunately, may benefit Le Pen and Bardella. People may be like, actually, they're a more credible way of taking on the left than voting for Macron.
No, and also what's happening with, I listened to a few interviews with some of these guys in the Popular Front, this left-wing coalition, which goes from absolutely right out there, far left, to kind of, Social Democrat, former Socialist Party. And François Hollande is now, in the mix. But what is interesting about that is that all that is happening in these interviews is basically, it's like somebody from the Greens goes on and gets asked would they agree with something that somebody on the right of the Socialist Party has said. Somebody on the right of the Socialist Party gets on and they're thrown statements by one of the Mélenchon people.
Like what you were just doing to me on Trident.
Exactly.
Like, are you really
exactly.
signing
You're
up
going to
for
vote
Trident?
for that? Yeah.
So in fact, what I'm really about is the two-child benefit cap or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The one other point which I picked up, I'm sure some of our listeners and viewers will have watched a wonderful French drama called Baron Noir. I don't know if you watched Baron Noir, but it was a very, very popular thing. And it was about essentially the big story, the big political story. It was about a French politician, centrist, who brought together a team based of left and right and swept all before them.
It was Macron.
Okay. Yeah, but and won the parliamentary the assembly elections. So this guy is called Eric Benzeki. And he basically wrote this Baron Noir about President Macron. And now the follow-up is this story of a black footballer falls out with his trainer, who's white, becomes a massive issue, becomes a massive culture war, spills out into politics. And then this depressed communications director,
which is you,
tries to take over, and an interior minister decides the way to kind of get a grip of this is to try to bring the right and the left together. Okay, anyway, one of Macron's people apparently helped on the screen, on the detail of the screenplay. They allowed them to film a scene in the Élysée, and
this presidential palace.
This piece in the Le Figaro essentially says that this guy who's a Mélenchoniste, who wrote this thing, has been influencing people in the Élysée. That is why he called this stupid election.
There is a sense, isn't there, all the time of media sort of drifting over. I mean, you will have experienced this in government with, certainly I felt this with Cameron's government, that everyone had been watching The West Wing and thought they were going to perform like something like The West Wing. Zelensky in Ukraine was, of course, a comedian and an actor who created his career around a drama.
Fictional
president out of nowhere. I think final thing is just to take seriously the policies that Bardella and Le Pen from the far right are proposing in France, given that it looks like they'll get most votes. It's a classic populist move that we may see, maybe with Trump, maybe spreading across Europe. So it's not in the way you think about far right as being all about, cutting taxes. In fact, what they're talking about is putting salaries up in companies by 10%. They're talking about cutting income taxes for the under 30s. So they're trying to appeal to the young. They're talking about slashing energy, gas, and electricity bills by getting rid of green taxes. That's going to be a common theme. But above all, the centre of it is, of course, immigration. And that's where they have this idea of, France for French people, and that if you're an illegal immigrant, you can't access the health system. And if you're an immigrant who hasn't had work for 6 months, you're going to have to leave the country. This is a lot of the core of the whole thing.
Right, but it's going to be very hard if Bardella becomes Prime Minister and Macron is President, because he stays on. And the other issue that's really kind of complicated is he can't dissolve Parliament again for at least a year.
Yeah, so it'd be hard for Bardella to get it through, but it'd also allow him to say the thing that's holding me back is this horrible President. Give us a proper majority next time and we'll show you.
Now, before we go, as we speak so negatively about so many people on this podcast, can I say something totally positive about somebody who just died?
Very good.
Howard Bernstein, who was the Chief Executive of Manchester City Council, and who, with Richard Leese, was a massive part of rebuilding Manchester after the IRA bomb. And he died a few days ago. And I think when we talk about people in public life, that is a guy whose legacy is beyond most politicians. Amazing man.
And I remember this because he's somebody who's had real cross-party respect. I remember George Osborne, very polarising figure, being a huge admirer of Howard Bernstein and them working together very closely.
Yeah, so it's very, very sad. So there we are. Howard Bernstein, RIP, best of public life.
Very good. Thank you.
There we are. That is it for this week. Next week will be the last one before the general election.
Can't believe it. Getting closer and closer.
And we may find out how you're going to vote, because I am frankly confused, Rory, about where you're standing right now. Utterly confused.
What an election it's going to be. I cannot believe it. I mean, they're going to write books about this.
And how are we going to spend election night? Should we remind people one last time?
Yeah, we will be up throughout the night. You don't have to be up throughout the night, but Alastair and I will be up throughout the night. He will be having healthy food. I'll be having unhealthy food. We will be joined by Emily Maitlis, by Christian Gurumurthy, by Gary Gibbon, who are the great stars of political commentary, but also by former and serving cabinet ministers. We're going to be joined by people from Gogglebox. So it'll be an extraordinary combination of inside news, experienced politicians, experienced commentators, but hopefully a lot of fun when you stop eating your bananas.
And also opinions.
See ya.
See ya.
Bye-bye, guys.